Welcome. We're just thinking today a little bit about how you might choose to set up an AI policy for a course. You might be thinking about something for the summer or the fall. And what I want to do is just think a little bit about some of the options available to you, what you might want to think about as you put that policy together, and why it's important to decide. So, I think one of the challenges, one of the risks that we tend to think about is the idea that we can just sort of make it go away by deciding that policy, just to say we're not going to use any AI. And I'm sympathetic to that. I think one of the things, if we could take a magic wand and say, yes, we're going to make that happen, I understand why that temptation would be there. And I think one of the challenges is that I think how we might define that is going to look actually very different than for students for whom AI, particularly embedded tools, have been a part of their experience coming in from K-12. Students have been asked to use something like Grammarly, for example, throughout all of high school. And so for them, something like that doesn't even sort of cross their mind as being part of AI. And so when you define what we mean by AI, I think this can end up being sort of ambiguous for students, unclear, and can create some sort of resentment. I think there's a possibility, there's places where this might be really useful, something where you might be having a hands-on practicum, or you're teaching something, again, maybe you're working out in the field in some specific way, and so you could imagine how maybe where you're working entirely in paper, or you're entirely doing something there where that particularly way might make the most sense to be specifically and explicitly saying that we're not using AI. But for those of us that might be turning in, working with a paper or other projects that might be in writing, and other, again, whether you're doing presentations and otherwise, right, the line between what we think of as AI and not, again, is quite intentionally becoming blurred through, again, embedded tools and agents as well. So I think the temptation to just simplify things by saying no AI actually, I think, can open a can of worms. And so I would actually encourage you just to be cautious with that approach, as much as that sounds really tempting. I think another option, again, that we can think about is more structured use, right? To say, we're specifically avoiding these sorts of things, but maybe these particular things. So maybe Grammarly in this way, but not rewriting. Maybe using it together in a group to sort of generate study materials, but to say when we use it, you're going to know, and when we're not going to use it, the default is no, right? I think is another possibility. Again, some of those things might be embedded, and so maybe laying out specifically what that is going to be useful. But this opens up what I think is one of the most important principles, right, which is transparency and disclosure. I think when you're talking about allowing students to use a particular AI tool, whether in guidance or independently, I think disclosure is going to be really important, right? It's not just something in terms of students' claim on their own education, but it's also, I think, significant for students who want to be able to perform well and present themselves well in industry, right? And again, in visual arts, in other areas, right, people are looking for proof of process, right? And so I think disclosure can be really important, whether that's a statement, whether it's filling in sort of a form, maybe a cover page with each assignment, but some way to sort of demonstrate here is how these tools were or were not used in the production of this end product. You might also, again, think about, again, whether we're doing things like track changes or other ways of sort of building in that transparency into the course itself. But I think that disclosure needs to be two-way, right? I think this is where we can run into trouble. I think students want to see us model the same kind of transparency, and so when we are using tools like this, again, I strive as much as possible in my classes to be as transparent as possible, to say, hey, we're doing this activity, and maybe the website we're going to use was coded together in Copilot, so that students know, right, and here's why I did that, because here's the payoff for this. And I think the why can be really important, and students want to see us being held to the same standard as well. I think the next level, aside from just like only when we're structuring, is what I'm calling sort of zones or domains, right? Maybe there are certain areas where you're like, you know what, go nuts on this, right? Maybe it's study tools, right? You can say, hey, you can put the things in, you can work with your chapter, you can generate problem sets or questions. You can work with, a tutor to sort of quiz you on things, and that you can do that online with certain tools. I think when you do that, I think it's helpful to really be specific about the domains and tasks that you think are appropriate for AI use. but essentially those things would be sort of unmonitored essentially. I still think disclosure would be useful in some way, right? Even if it's just to collect data for yourself to see how those are working. And I also think this is better suited for upper level classes when students have the executive function and experience to know which kinds of things are appropriate and how you would define the difference between studying and writing the paper or putting a project together. I think that can make an issue. But the other thing I want to mention is that there are equity challenges when it comes to this, right? Because at the moment we're not providing a specific AI tool that's custom to our university, but we do have through the Microsoft 365 Online, the Microsoft Copilot, right? And that is something that all students would have access to through their university accounts. But you want to think about, right, would a student who has a premium subscription to Claude or an OpenAI product, will they have a different experience or different access or success in the course that a student who wouldn't be able to afford that would do, and what would that mean in terms of the equity and access in your class? And so I would encourage you to be cautious as you think about sort of permitting a sort of a full domain, right? Maybe it's studying, maybe it's working with a particular custom tutor for your course, because I think one of the things you want to think about is, right, are all students going to have equal access to this? And I think that's an important piece. Another option I often think of is either sort of letting things, again, in quite transparently, sort of let students use AI tools as they see fit with disclosure, or as a group sort of setting those rules together. I think it's instantly obvious this is most appropriate for senior level or graduate work, right? And I think one of the challenges is, I think, when we think about bringing in these tools, right? Again, I think I would have my own strong opinions about when that would be appropriate or if that would be appropriate. But I think it's useful. It may be useful when this kind of policy is educational, right? The purposes of it are connected to the learning outcomes of the course. Maybe it's a course that's asking students to work with LLMs specifically in computer science, not sort of abandoning the attempt to monitor or to defy or to I don't know, to argue for the value of the work that we're doing. So I would say I don't want to see that as sort of giving up on monitoring it. I think that's a dangerous place to be. But I think if you're sort of opening the gates on purpose, I think there may be educational reasons for that, but I don't want to see that for any real reason other than for pure educational purposes, if that makes sense. When it comes to writing a policy, I think one of the things that is helpful, right, when you think policy, we've talked about this before, thinking about AI detection, I think setting expectations, setting sort of what your standards are and discussing that with students is really important. We can talk a little bit about kind of what maybe burden of proof is. There's good evidence, and again, I can point you to some resources that basically all of the tools that sort of build for motivation, right, interacting one-on-one, seeing the purpose of the work that they're doing, having a process rather than a final product are things that will encourage students to be following more traditional, as we'd hope, academic integrity. But I also know that I think setting clear expectations in that syllabus and discussing those with students can be really important. But frankly, it's not a one-time conversation. It's going to happen throughout the semester, especially if you're teaching online, making an opportunity for students to discuss, to sort of understand the purpose behind these and how it's connected to the value that they're getting from their education, I think is really important. So it doesn't necessarily define everything for you, but I think, again, thinking about that range from absolutely no AI, which again can be kind of fuzzy, again, even if you're using Google Docs at this stage, right, these tools are starting to get embedded. It's in some ways a kind of hopeful fiction unless we're doing a really particular kind of course. Structured use, maybe specific domains where there's permission, and then either setting with the group or sort of opening the gates. I think these are all options that may be available to you, but I think thinking carefully about that and speaking with that with students is going to be really important as well. So if you've got questions, let me know. But again, this is just some thoughts on how you might choose your policies heading into the next academic year.